Good morning, everyone. Gosh, I was listening to the Daily Word there, and I thought, oh gosh, maybe I picked the wrong parable to connect with that. I think finding all the treasures buried in the yard was perfect for that, and also, but this is another parable of Jesus, and I have a little bit of a different take on it this morning. One that I think is esoterically different, if I could use that word. And that is this. It is the parable of the sower. Now that's found in all three of the Gospels as we know them, the synoptic Gospels, as we call them, because they all sound alike. And that is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, it's funny that the Bible puts Matthew before Mark because Mark was written before Matthew. It should be Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John in that order, but it's not. Somebody thought, I guess, that it just sounded better and had a better feel to it. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Yeah, I kind of like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It kind of it has a lyrical quality about it, which I like. However, there's one thing that always seems to be forgotten. Well, first of all, I'm going to read you this parable, and then we'll discuss the differences that I've found in it related to this. It says that in the 4th chapter of Mark, stated this way. It says that on an occasion, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat out on the lake while all the people were along the shoreline at the water's edge. Now let's scientifically think about that just for a moment before I even get into what the parable is. So they were so crowded there on the edge of the lake that Jesus gets in a boat. Scientifically, what happens is the water reflects the sound waves back onto the shore in such a way that everyone can hear him properly. Much better so than if he stood out in the middle of the people on the ground, allowing their bodies and their clothing to absorb and muffle some of the sound waves. And people on the edge would be saying, what? What did he say? I can't hear him. Let's get closer. And they would have just scrunched one another, I think. So Jesus properly knew, maybe everyone in that time knew, get out in the water and the sound will be carried out in every direction evenly, and it'll be easier for all the people there to hear. If you've ever owned a boat and you're out on the water, or rented a boat, or just been in somebody else's boat and you're out on the water, you can hear people talking hundreds of yards away in their boat. You can hear them talking because the sound waves are reflecting off of the surface of the water and carrying all the way to where you are. That's why it's very, very important. I learned from some of my friends as we used to go out fishing together. If you get one, don't holler out, I got one here. Oh, here's where they are, because suddenly 20 boats will be right on top of you. So you got to be careful about that and just, very gently tell your partner, get the net, get the net. And that seems to take care of it very well. And I used to love to fish. I've been telling Natasha about it a lot, and she told me she did too. She used to go out to the river at her grandmother's house and fish, she and her brother, when they went to visit their grandmother. Okay, back to the Gospels. Here's the way it is written. Picking up again. It says, he taught them many things by parables, and in his teachings he said, listen, or behold. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. They were just too leggy. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants so that they did not bear grain. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced a crop, multiplying 30, 60, or even 100-fold. Then Jesus said to them, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Now it goes on to say that he explained to his disciples what the parable meant. But that's not the way that it was originally written. What do I mean by originally written? There was a group of sayings taken from a book that we now call, that was found in the Qumran area among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which we call now the Gospel of Thomas. But it's also called the Sayings of Thomas, because there are 114 verses or sayings in there, and they describe many of these parables, and some that the synoptic gospels do not mention whatsoever in there. Something else occurs in there, and I'm going to read this to you and see if we can see the differences. This is from the Sayings of Thomas. Jesus said, "Look, the sower went out. He filled his hand and cast the seed. Some fell upon the road. The birds came. They gathered them. Others fell upon the rock, and struck no root in the ground, nor did they produce any ears. And others fell on the thorns. They choked the seed, and the worm ate them. And others fell on the good earth, and it produced good fruit. It yielded 60 per measure and 120 per measure." There's some slight differences in there if you'll listen closely. First of all, there's no mention of the sower going out and holding the seed in his hand in the synoptic gospels. But that's a very important view for us to take on that. For instance, the idea of the sower, we have to ask ourselves, who is the sower in this case? The synoptic gospels say that the sower is God. But in this one, it clearly points out that the sower is you, is me. We are the farmer. We are the sower. We are the ones going out to do this act. We hold it in our hand, meaning that we hold a conviction about each of these seeds and what's going to happen with them. But then after that, it's just they're scattered, just like in the synoptic gospel, scattered. Not intentionally scattered, it just happens that way. Scattered out amongst the 3 other positions other than the road. The soil, the rocky soil or the rock, and the third being the good soil. Now here is another interpretation of that very same one. A sower came forth. He filled his hand and scattered the seed. Some fell on the path. Birds came and gathered them. Others fell on rocky ground. They found no means of taking root in the soil and did not send up ears of corn. Others fell among thorns. These stifled the grain, and the worm ate the seed. Others fell on good soil, and this portion produced an excellent crop. It gave as much as 60-fold, 120-fold. Now you notice in the gospel written by Mark, it says 30, 60, 100. This one says 60, 120. If we go back far enough, we realize that Thomas is an older writing of this because, first of all, it's written not in Greek, it's written in Aramaic, Syriac actually. It's written in this language because that is the language of Jesus, the particular area of the country that he lived in. He was an Aramaic speaker. He was Aramaic. He was Jewish. Now, the odd thing about it is that in the to explain that the Gospel of Thomas, or the sayings of Thomas, is older, is that he uses the Aramaic understanding of 60 and 120. This is based on a system that is not a 10 base number system like we use today, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, but rather it is based on a 60 base system. This 60 base system goes all the way back, as far as you can see, into Mesopotamia, into the Babylonians. This was the system that they used when they were counting, and this is the system that he uses. So obviously, this is an older version of this very same idea, this parable. The other thing about it is that there are 114 of these sayings in this gospel, so-called Gospel of Thomas. Scholars have long been looking for the source of the sayings that are included in all the synoptic gospels. This source, the Germans call the Quelle, and that means source. And that is what they've been looking for, is the Q source. Q comes up a lot of times in the world. QAnon now, that's something else totally. Q as in Star Trek, no, that's another guy. That's something else. But this is the sayings, the source material. They've looked and looked and looked for it and can't find it anywhere. And lo and behold, here it is. The sayings, the original sayings, are based in the gospel or the book or the sayings of Thomas, right there under their nose all this time. So now many scholars are beginning to understand this and believe this and hold this to be the source, the Q that they've been searching for so long. Now, another thing I want you to notice, like I said, you notice that he reaches out and fills his hand. That's not mentioned in the others. Why not? Maybe they didn't think it was important, but it's not being sourced accurately. That's an important part of the story, that his hand is filled. Very important. Now, something else that needs to be considered in this is this. When he filled his hand and cast the seed, this looks no other than an attempt to indicate the fullness or completeness of the sowing. A handful, rather than just gather some on the tips of your fingers and kind of scatter it around. No, this is a handful. This is as much as you, as the source material here, can cast. So rather than allowing this to be a story about how God has cast this and so forth, it makes more sense to see it in the form that it was put by Thomas, that it is you and I who have done this. You and I are the source of this. Well, what do the seeds represent? The Bible teaches us through the Gospels that it is sowing souls. Now that to me just doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't make pure sense at all. That would mean that some are saved in good soil and some are just forgotten. No, it's the sense that in each of our minds, we hold within ourselves rocky soil, a path, good soil, thorny soil. Each one of us have these within us. Excuse me, nose itching. Now, taken from that point of view, let's look at that just a moment. What would the path represent in us? Each of us has within ourselves what we call a rut. We're just living in a rut. We just do things automatically, time after time after time, the same way. And that is our path. Wake up in the morning, go use the toilet, weigh yourself, come back, fix coffee, maybe a little bit of breakfast, get that done, go on your computer, start the day exactly the same every day. We do it and do it over and over. That is our path. Any new thoughts that come to us fall within that path and are quickly forgotten and are eaten up by the birds. What are the birds represented in us? They represent that ability within us to absorb and gobble up everything that comes our way and ignore it as though it really didn't happen. What is the rocky soil in us? That is that place within us that is so used to this rote way of living that it has developed within ourselves belief systems. And the belief systems carry out this way. Some of the belief systems we have are very, very deep and good, and they produce. Others of our belief systems are just shallow, everyday thoughts. They come and they go. We look back in the past. We stick our head and our thoughts out into the future. Nothing really going on. Very shallow. Anything new that comes into our lives, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'll think about that someday. Doesn't take root. The light of God falls upon it and it just withers and dies, and we move on. And we think, now, what was that I was thinking about? It's in one of these books or magazines or somewhere that I piled up and made a trail through my house about. Oh no, that's a hoarder. We don't, none of us are hoarders. Now, we go on and look at the soil that is full of thorns. This is the place where good thoughts fall and can take root, but are choked out by fear, hate, prejudice, all these things that are within ourselves, not only for the outer world, but also for the inner world. The fear we have that we are not good enough, the fear we have that we will never have enough, the fear we have that what we have will be taken away, the fear we have of death, the fear we have of losing all, constantly worrying about things. This isn't necessary. Now, there is the fourth one, and that, of course, is the well-prepared soil. It accepts the seeds of truth. It accepts that which is presented to us from the fullness of our own hand. We spread it out. It falls on this fertile, well-prepared earth, ground within us. And this part of our mind, connected not only to our brain, but also to our heart, produces forth thoughts plus feelings produced in the outer world. Now suddenly we can connect this with the fifth element of unity. It's good to know all these things, but we must act. The first act we must have is going deep within, gathering all of these words of truth, of fullness as much as we can, and then actively spreading it out, knowing that some of it'll stick and some of it won't, but that's okay. That's the nature of being a human. So we see this happening in each one of our lives, each one of us. It happens. And the wonderful thing about this happening is that it's happening to those that we see above us in our own perception of things, and those that we perceive to be below us. So everyone is capable of having this good, well-prepared mind within. It may be a small plot of earth. It may be just a small backyard garden. Or it may be a complete, huge acreage full. Now you notice in here that the word is used corn. Corn didn't come along until many years afterwards, hundreds of years afterwards, because corn is not, it's maize, and that is a new world vegetation. It's not something that could have been produced in those times. However, if we look at this and use that term corn, we're missing the idea that corn was used for everything. Everything. Wheat was used for that, as well as barley, other things. In the olden days in Europe, it was all called corn. When this, it was very much like we say, hey, I'm going to the store. You want anything? Yeah, give me a Coke. What kind of Coke do you want? That used to be the phrase that a lot of people used long ago. Everything was called a Coke. In their time, everything was used that was called corn. So when maize came to the European continent, they said, what kind of corn is this? That was just the view they had. So when the crop is produced, it's all called corn. It doesn't make any difference. So just eliminate the fact that it's not specifically corn as we know today. It's just a grain. This grain produced 60 to 120 bushels per acre, or it produced more than the one seed. That's the whole point. It multiplies. It produces more than the one seed that was there, and it produces in abundance, fully in abundance. And Jesus says in another place in the sayings and also in the Gospels, I come to bring you life. I come to bring it in abundance. And that's the idea. Learn how to use the sayings. Learn how to use the words of truth. Learn how to bring them inside yourself. Produce them in such a way that they produce thoughts, multiple thoughts, all over, and that they can be spread in such a way that even though there are 3 or 4 different places that they can land, 3 or 4 different crops that can or cannot be produced, it doesn't matter. Don't give up. Always know that there is within inside yourself a place that is learning to cultivate, learning to prepare, learning to bring forth more than that was ever there once before. This is the idea behind this parable. And I hope you enjoyed the fact that it comes from the sayings of Jesus that are gathered by Thomas, as opposed to simply the repeat of them in the Synoptic Gospels. Thanks. God bless.